Today, this is a white paper from the David Project, which is a major pro-Israel organization in this country. And it talks about the importance of this battle of ideas, particularly on university campuses. They say, of course, they talk about Palestine solidarity activism, or activism for equal rights as anti-Israel activity. That's their term, not my term. But they say the influence of the worldview that students form during their college years on their politics, and therefore on the policies that might ultimately be adopted by the United States government, should not be underestimated. Their education in a milieu of pervasive negativity toward Israel. Again, I would correct that and say negativity toward Israeli apartheid. By further generations of students may significantly weaken long-term American government support for the Jewish state. The long-term impact of the college years and the heightened importance of campus to anti-Israel activists in the United States make campus the most important battleground for Israel's future positioning in the United States. I think I agree with that, except, of course, their terminology. But the importance here is what ideals or ideas or principles are you going to apply to this case? Are you going to take the universal ideals that you espouse for yourselves and for the United States and apply them to Israelis and Palestinians? Or are you going to treat Israel as a special case where it gets a pass and where it can carry on with these discriminatory policies and practices that are subsidized by the United States and supported and politically and financially underwritten by the United States? I think that's the decisive battle that's going on now. And of course, to see this in the broader context of the role of the United States in the world. I think many people hoped when this president was elected in 2008 that we would see a sort of fundamental shift in the United States approach to the world. We haven't seen it. This administration has been as committed as every other before it to global American dominance, what they call leadership, but I think what many people around the world see as imperialism. Nobody elected the United States leader of the world. And if there were an election, I'm pretty sure the United States wouldn't win it. So let's not kid ourselves that this is a role the rest of the world welcomes. Where we have 1,000 military bases. There was one study that said the Pentagon runs 240 golf courses around the world. While in this country, firehouses and police stations and schools and libraries are being shut down. None of that has changed. And in the Middle East, our support for Israel, this unquestioning, unconditional support for Israel, negates any possibility of the United States being seen in a better light. Where we have to support dictatorships in Egypt and other countries and then pretend to have supported the revolution all along. And that wasn't true. The United States was very much against the overthrow of Mubarak until after it happened. They were against it until they were for it, or whatever the phrase is. So this whole system of relationships of the United States has to change too, and Israel sits in the middle of that. Listen now to the drumbeats for war with Iran. This administration, the United States government, and all its intelligence agencies have said time and again, including in the past couple of weeks, that they do not believe that Iran is developing a nuclear weapon. 3 weeks ago, the Defense Secretary, Leon Panetta, was on 60 Minutes and said he does not believe Iran is moving towards developing a nuclear weapon. Shouldn't that be the end of the story after what happened with Iraq? And yet the drumbeat for war is getting louder and louder and louder. The effort to make us all used to the idea that war with Iran is inevitable. Why is this going on? Where is it coming from? I wouldn't say it's solely the responsibility of Israel. I don't think that would be true. But it's certainly true that much of it is coming from Israel and its supporters in this country. This administration came in saying that they wanted to have diplomatic dialogue with Iran, and instead we're waging economic warfare on Iran. Iran, which this administration says is not moving towards a nuclear weapon, is now under tighter and tighter economic, financial, trade and other sanctions on its central bank, on gasoline supplies, an oil embargo. These are forms of warfare against Iran in international law. I'm not saying we have to endorse Iran or its system of government, or that we have to like it, although it is a wonderful civilization about which we know little in this country. But war? So this is the broader context in which Palestine sits, and we have to change the conversation. In the final few minutes, let me say I think this conversation is changing, and that's why I think the backlash that we're seeing is so strong. The effort to marginalize any discussion. I can't tell you the things. Go on the internet and see the things I'm called. Anti-Semite, Goebbels, KKK, Hitler. All of these names are used against me and others. Not rarely, daily. And this is an attempt, of course, I think it's a sign of bankruptcy that those who use this kind of terminology don't have any arguments to respond to what we're saying. But I think it's also a sign of desperation, an effort to stop these ideas of equality, of universal rights, from leaving the station. It's too late. And I think the other powerful factor is the growing global solidarity, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And I'm, of course, an unapologetic supporter of boycott, divestment, and sanctions on Israel, as I was for South Africa, and shame on anyone who didn't support BDS on South Africa, and many didn't. That's what we forget. We think, oh, it must have been an easy call to support sanctions and boycott and divestment from South Africa. Well, if that's true, why did it take from the mid-1950s, when South Africans first called for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, until the 1980s for it to become mainstream in this country? Why did the US government resist sanctions on South Africa until almost the very end? It took broad-based civil society participation. It took students on campuses demanding accountability, not letting the issue go away, to change the climate and the atmosphere in this country. And that is starting to happen now with Israel and Palestine. And I think those are things that, aside from all the noise, aside from all the name-calling, we should be very hopeful about. Thank you. So I think we can go straight into the discussion. So I should say, be brief so everyone can have a chance to say something. If, I will sometimes give people a chance for a follow-up, so, don't try to say everything at once, and let's have a discussion.
Yeah. You didn't say anything about the wall and how devastating that has been.
Well, you're saying it. Why don't you say something about it? I mean, you're talking about, of course, you're talking about the wall that Israel built through the West Bank, beginning in the early 2000s. Of course, the excuse Israel used was that it was for security. But the point that many people made is that, you know, if this wall was really for security, Israel would have built it on the line between the West Bank and Gaza, but between the West Bank and Israel. But what they did was they built the wall sort of snaking through the West Bank and annexing more and more Palestinian land. And the wall is, of course, we see every week in different villages and towns along the route of the wall. Demonstrations every week in villages like Bil'ain and Nil'ain and Beit Omar and others, where there's active settler colonization of Palestinian land. Demonstrations every week. You know, people are always saying, where's the Palestinian Gandhi? Why don't Palestinians protest peacefully? Well, they're out there every week doing it and getting shot and getting tear gassed and getting jailed and so on. So the wall has been devastating because it has separated so many Palestinians from their land, from their olive trees, from each other. It's really a wall that, it's a lie that it's a wall that separates Israelis from Palestinians. It's a wall that separates Palestinians from Palestinians and Palestinians from their land. But the political or legal significance is also important because in 2004, the International Court of Justice in The Hague issued a legal opinion that declared that the wall was illegal and had to be removed, and the settlements are illegal. This reaffirmed, you know, many UN Security Council resolutions that Israel has just trampled on. And it called on countries to take their responsibility and to make Israel comply. Nobody lifted a finger. And that is what gave impetus to the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions movement. So in 2005, 170 Palestinian civil society organizations, every political faction, trade unions, all sorts of civil society groups, issued the call for boycott, divestment and sanctions, making 3 demands. Ending the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza and dismantling the wall, number 1. 2, ending all forms of discrimination and inequality for Palestinian citizens of Israel. And 3, respecting the rights of Palestinian refugees, including the right of return. So, the point I want to make, and I thank you for raising, is that the reason Palestinians have turned to boycott, divestment and sanctions is because of the complicity of world governments with what Israel is doing, which is very different from, I mean, there's all sorts of complicity in other places, but, you know, I mentioned Iran. Iran is under, 78 types of sanctions or something without having really done anything. I mean, the US doesn't like Iran, but there aren't actual things Iran has done that, that would justify all these sanctions. So it's really the complicity and impunity, and the wall was really one of the precipitating factors that led Palestinians to push for this kind of global solidarity BDS approach. And it's really an important point you've raised. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you said, I really maybe go a little bit more into the vandalism here in this country. It's pretty clear what you said, but maybe some more detail on the mechanics. What about what?
Those who call themselves, or what we might call liberal Zionists,